everybody. Cindy Daycheck with Queen Bee Creations. I'm on my knees right now, but I'm going to have to be standing and squatting and things to be able to work on this big piece. You're kind of seeing the middle portion. There's a top and a bottom to it. Let me see if I can just slowly, without making it really sick, give you an idea of the top, which again is fairly flat, fairly simple, but that piece up there, I can't figure out how to move my hand. Anyway, that piece up there comes off, and then it's just a straight flat top, so it at least adds a little bit more interest. And then the bottom, there's one big solid drawer along the bottom of this piece as well, and that's the third piece. The center piece is solid. So there's three pieces to this big armoire, but I'm going to paint it as a whole because I'm looking at the paint finish. I want to be kind of vertical rather than doing it in little pieces. I want it all moving up and down. I had originally planned on perhaps doing some molds. So the piece itself is fairly flat face. There's not a lot of detail. There's a little bit of raised, intricate, molded detail around the mirror. That's about it. That's about it. So not a lot of interest that way. But when I came down to kind of take a look at, do I want to do some molds? I really decided that, you know what? This is a rustic piece, and adding the molds maybe dressed it up a little bit too much, took it in a direction that it wasn't meant to be. So I'm going to see what I can do with paint first, and I'm just looking at adding the base coat on today, and then we'll look at adding some additional color. I don't have a clue what. For the base, all I'm doing pretty simply is I'm going to be using DIY paint, so Debbie's Design Diary paints in mint chip and in sandy blonde, which is a kind of a taupey sort of color. So pretty neutral, pretty safe, but again, just looking at using it as the base. So for today, I'm going to kind of show you the middle and maybe on one side and moving over in terms of just the start of this. I don't know how fascinating it ever is to see the base coat going on apart from the initial, oh my God, can't believe she painted that phase that I tend to get a lot when I'm doing older pieces. Really, I'm just kind of roughly getting a bit of color on here. I'll put my back to you mostly, but not to be avoided most of the time on this kind of a piece. So I'm just looking for, more than anything else, kind of a fairly neutral base. So I'm thinking, this is a sandy blonde, the mint chip sandy blonde. You can't see up here, but there's going to be up above and down below. That I'll probably do the mint chip again in the middle, and then the sandy blonde mint chip and sandy blonde out toward the side. So a little bit of a striping effect at this stage, right? But definitely not looking at it finishing off that. So we're starting with some of the black. Black is really almost the only other color that I'm adding into this base coat. And this does not have to be, put on pretty. It doesn't have to be all smooth blending. I'm going to do a little bit of blending with it. I think that you guys can still see that low. I'm still going to do a little bit of blending with it, but nothing major. I just want to get a little bit of that black in a lot of the areas that I'm going to want to have some of that shading in. I think that we're going to be doing, toward the end, we'll also be doing a lot more, a little bit of wax blending with some of this, I think, too. So we'll be having some of that action happening. But I do know that most of the top that you can't see is up there is going to be black. Painted black right now. And a lot of the bottom is going to be painted black right now. So I'm just kind of lightly misting the paint just so I can spread it a little bit. It doesn't need to be as harsh, as stark as it is. Blend it a little bit more. We're going to add a couple more colors in and get them kind of just lightly blended. I'm not going to worry about them being as nicely blended as if it was a finish I was leaving. I just want to get a pretty solid base on this so that when I do some of the distressing, now I'm planning on, when this is finished, distressing fairly heavily. So I will be taking it back to wood in some spots, some lightly down to expose some of these colors. We're going back in the middle with that mint chip. I do have on my tray a little bit of old 57 from DIY, which is a little bit more of a turquoisey color that I'm adding in. Today, we get to cover this mess up. So, anybody that was worried, we're going to hide this a little bit, but we're going to do something a little bit different. And I've got this chair here just so that I have a little bit of a tabletop to kind of show you what I'm doing here. We're going to mix up some milk paint. Now, this is an old late 1800s, early 1900s armoire. And it was a, well, it still is a pine. I didn't change the wood. It's just hidden now. So pine armoire, and very traditional for paint finishes back then to be milk paint. And you get some people that use milk paint all the time, some people that don't. It is great for a chippy finish. My dining room set actually is all done in milk paint, and I have not used it since. So it isn't a product that I have a ton of experience with. I do know, however, milk paint is very particular about things. And as much as you get this great chippy finish, you don't always get a say with how much chippiness you get. There are certain products that are out there to be able to help you be able to control and manage, and certainly you get more of a feel for it as you go along. This one's a little bit iffy, and I'm just trying to open a bag at the same time if I look like I'm struggling. This one's a little bit iffy only because we are starting out by layering the chalk paint over top of other paint. So the color that we're looking at is one by, this is a Homestead House paint that I'm using. Homestead House is a Canadian milk paint line. I believe, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, I think that they're Toronto based, and I think that they're the same company that also manufactures Fusion Mineral Paint, which is an all-in-one paint. We're going to be doing this in a color called Voyager, which actually I don't know if this is a color that exists or not. It's one that I've had probably sitting on my shelf for 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, unused. So because I had it, that's what I'm using. But it's like this brick red color, which I think is awesome. Really, really traditional for a piece like this. The hope is that we get a little bit of chipping, a little bit of crackling, but not tons. And to be able to then sand it back and to expose some of these areas. I then envision finishing it with wax and some black wax to also continue some of that aging process. That's what's in my head. We'll see what I'm able to make happen. The thing about milk paint is it comes in a powdered form, which means it is shelf stable in this form virtually forever. right? Bag, 8, 10 years old. I'm not even sure that they make it this color anymore, to tell you the truth. So if I'm telling you now, Homestead House, Voyager, if you don't see it on their website, sorry, my apologies. But again, I should still be fine in mixing this up. The only issue that you have with milk paint is that once it's mixed, you don't have the option of storing it forever. You might be able to get a day or two out of it if you refrigerate it. But like any kind of milk product, it's going to go bad. So this does not, gee, let's mix it up and leave it sitting for a long time. And as you leave it, it will actually start to settle. You'll need to remix it. I'm going to be mixing it up in this container because I'm going to use an immersion blender, because I'm going to be mixing up a fair bit of it and I want it to go in smoothly. I want to get all the lumps out. An immersion blender does an awesome job. And because I'm mixing up a lot, it makes sense. If you were just mixing up a little bit, you were going to do a little tiny side table and you couldn't be bothered, or the immersion blender is not going to work well because you don't have enough liquid or volume, you can just mix it up with a whisk. You might get a couple of lumps, but usually you're able to kind of stir that out, whisk it out fairly well and fairly evenly. You have the option with milk paint of making it as thin as you would want. If you've got raw wood, milk paint is actually awesome because you can mix it up fairly thin and it will stain the wood. It will serve as a stain. So you will see a lot of like early 1800 pieces, if they've never been refinished again, that still has color. That's the milk paint. And this is a paint that it can last a long time. So it's a very hardy paint. It's a very durable paint. It does have that chalky finish. It's really traditional to finish it off with wax to be able to seal it. But it is a pretty durable product. The nice thing too is that you can mix the powder colors and in any way that you want. So it's got a lot of flexibility with extending the color lines. Obviously it's a water-based product, so I'm going to be adding water to it, so you don't have to make a fair bit right now and see if I can get away with 2 coats right away. But it's got a lot of versatility. You get a lot of people that are scared in using the paint, so that they might not use it. One, because you have to mix it up. And here I'm starting off with, it said 1 to 1, and I did 3 scoops. This is a 1/4 cup measure, so I did 3/4 of a cup of the powder, and I did 1 full cup of water. I'm going to mix that up and take a look at that. So a little bit of noise here, sorry. Okay, that's really thick. So we get to add more. This is a bonding agent. So because we are going right over paint and not just straight wood. If it was straight wood, you can just do the paint straight onto it because it's going to, that first coat is actually going to stain into the wood more than anything else. Because we're going over top of paint, we need to add something that helps it actually stick a little bit. Now, the bonding agent said do 1 part of this to 1 part of mixed paint. That's not going to happen. I don't have enough. So I'm looking to help it stick a little better than not having it in. And we're just going to see. So it's feeling like I did about half a container of that. That's 250 mils, so maybe about 125 mils in there. What I didn't want is a really bright cherry red or, you know, fire engine red. I'm just going to stick that down in that jar to clean off. This is non-toxic, no VOC, there's no there's no smell really attached to it. I mean, it's got a bit of an odor, nothing that lingers or does anything. When I'm applying this though, one of the things that I don't want, because this is a clay-based paint and it will get reactivated when it's wet. So what I don't want to do is to do a lot of back and forth thing, because I'm going to reactivate and pull this paint off. I want this to layer over top. So I am going to try for kind of a nice even coat just from the start. I do expect, oh, I like that color. Thank goodness. I do expect that I'm going to need 2 coats. So I am hopeful that I have a, oh, this is going to be an awesome color for this, guys. You can see that it's like that deep, rich brick red. It's not a bright cherry red or Christmas red. So very much perfect for the age of this piece. It's kind of that red that you would see on all those old antique, gee, I went into a Pioneer Village kind of looks. And I'm actually getting really decent coverage with it. Like even going over the black, I mean, it intensifies the color of the red, but it's covering really quite nicely. So we'll see whether I need a full second coat or not. I'm thinking yes, only because I'm going to be doing a lot of distressing, and I want to make sure that I don't take off all of the red with the sanding. I want to make sure that as much as I'm going to have a lot of places that are distressed down to the various colors, but also potentially to, I forgot to turn off notifications, sorry guys. So I'm going to distress down to the various colors and some to just the wood. Okay, so you guys have an idea of where it's going. I'm going to finish the front top of it that you can't see, do the 2 sides in the very top, let it dry, do a second coat. When we get back together again, that's when we're going to do some of the sanding. I've shifted it outside because I have a ton of sanding to do on this one, and it's a nice day, and I'd rather all of the little red dust particles float around my backyard than float around inside my house. I'm not going to keep you long. I'm mostly just going to talk to you about what I'm doing, because most of the work is done with my little handheld mouse sander. I have a 220 grit sandpaper on this, which is pretty fine, which means I'm not looking at taking off tons of this very fast, but what I am doing is allowing some of the natural chippiness. Now, I've got this side roughly done with just my sanders, so I'm thinking I came in close enough that you can kind of see where some of the chipping is happening. This side has not been done, so this is it solid, but you can see that it's wanting to chip in straight lines, and as I'm sanding, I can see little chips go flying off. And this is kind of the beauty of milk paint. It's sometimes the frustration of milk paint. It's going to do what it wants to do. So with milk paint, you have to allow a little bit more of an organic look. Sometimes you're going to get big round flakes that come off, which is beautiful. Sometimes it's going to work like this. It's kind of going with the grain. And I'm not minding that, because I'm getting the flecks of our deep beige coming through, and some of the mint chip, and some of the dark black. I'm doing some hand sanding afterwards. So let me put this down. And I have sandpaper in a 120, so I was using 220 with the mouse sander. This is a 120, so much coarser, rougher, but I also, and I have 120 as well, and just a hand piece that I'll do, and I also have 320. So the thing about
chalk paints and about milk paints is that if you sand them, they will go buttery smooth. And so what I'm getting here is if I took like a 320 to this, all I'm doing is taking off a little bit of that top layer, and it's going to leave it really smooth so that when I go to wax it tomorrow, and I will come on live to show you that, because that's when the colors are going to pop a little bit more. I'm doing some of the hand sanding around some of the edges and some of the corners, places where I know I have some of the black. One, because when I go to do a little bit of the black waxing, which I'm going to want to do in some of the details and some of the corners and crevices to age it a little bit more, that black will pop even more. It'll highlight that, it'll deepen that. But even where I don't do it, it's going to add a little bit of a shadowing and a little bit of a depth to the piece. But you can start to see where the detail starts popping out. The sander took off a fair bit around the hardware, so I can see a lot of the black. I've got some of the natural wood popping through in some of the places as well, which is going to look a lot richer once I get nice up close and personal FaceTime with me. But it's going to look a lot richer once we put the waxes on as well. So it's not long, hard work doing this kind of sanding, because this sands so easily, right? It just is so easy to be able to smooth out and come off. It's just messy and it's dirty, and when you're using the sander, it's really noisy. And I don't want to subject you guys to that, but because I'm going to give you a second of it, but because I started to see that even if I was going crossways with the sander, it was chipping in up-down motions, which could be because that's how I painted. If you recall, I was predominantly painting in that up-down. That's how it wants to chip. So I shifted and I started moving the sander in that up-down to help facilitate it. In which case, what I'm expecting is that once I go and I wax it, it's going to give a lot more of a graining kind of effect. And I'm thinking that could be pretty awesome. I'm hoping it's going to be really awesome. But I'm thinking that's the way it's going to go. So I'm going to finish doing the mouse sanding on around the mirror and on this side. That's all I have left to do. And then I'm going to take my hand sanding pads, and I'm going to go in a little bit more on some of the detail, places where I want it distressed a little bit more, or in particular just go over softly to make sure that it's all smoothed out, and perhaps exposing a little bit more of the black, which is a little bit more subtle, but it's going to add that richness and depth. With this, what I have got, you're probably noticing it looks like two different colors. This has the wax applied already. So I've got the clear wax on, and while it is still soft, wet, first applied, I haven't buffed it, so I haven't wiped it back, I haven't buffed it. I've applied black wax. And I'm just using any Sloan waxes because it's what I have. And I quite like her waxes. I don't have a problem with those. DIY makes a great wax. A lot of companies make great soft waxes for furniture. And one of the things I want to show you today when we're doing this side, make it look like this side, but one of the things I want you to see is how little wax I use. So these don't seem huge, but they go a long, long way. So if you're applying it properly, you're not going to have a lot of issue. This is the brush that I'm using. It is just a nice flat-topped brush. You can get any Sloan has a wax brush that's pointed. I prefer these flat-top brushes. You just want something that's nice and easy in the hand. You'll see as I'm doing it why. I don't want to work harder than I have to. I'm old. But this is how much wax. You can barely see it, and it's just around the edges of my brush. It's not even in the center because this is kind of low, but I want you to see how far that goes, right? You don't need lots. We're going to make it travel.
Okay, glasses for this, just so that I can see. And this is a great color to show you this on, because you can really see it change color, right? You can really see where the wax is getting applied. And I haven't re-dipped it all, but you can see now where it's just starting to not be as deep. I'm not getting as much coverage. So that tiny, tiny little bit of wax has already done almost a quarter of that doorway for me. Okay, and I'm just dipping that same little bit. You can just barely see it on there. And I'm doing exactly the same. So you can see with this brush, and yeah, I like to really push it down into the paint. I get some people that, when they're using their wax, say, oh, I skip spots and I can see little places. I go back and forth over a lot of the same territory, and I'm kind of pushing the wax into it. And I will often hold it like this, or I hold it like this, but it's way, way better than some of those that have the long handle on it. Just go for something that's really going to allow you to be able to work it without a lot of excess motion. I like to apply my dark wax or my black wax right now. I haven't wiped back the clear. I haven't taken off any of the excess wax. I can see some spots where there is some. That's okay, because I want to play with the black wax. I want some movement to it. And having this wax not dry, having it still kind of wet, hasn't all soaked in, gives me that opportunity. Now, these are those old shoe shine brushes. I don't know if you remember, or you can do it. If I'm doing a lot of dark wax or black wax, and I want to kind of go in circular motions to really work it in, because I'm kind of doing it all over, look, I will use this. I will use this, or I'll use a bigger brush. I tend to, though, keep them all separate. So this one, it's probably backward for you guys, but I've just written black on there, and I've got one upstairs, just the same, that says brown, right? So I keep those separate, and I like my clear wax to just have clear on it. And I have a brush upstairs, a bigger brush, because I use a lot of it in white wax. So I use a lot of white wax more than anything else. What I'm going to use today is this. It looks awful. It is an old chip brush. No, nothing magical about it, that I have cut down. So it's just in those little stiff kind of bristly stage. And so not fancy dancy, $2. Take an old one that the bristles at the end are kind of going wonky on you, and just cut them off. And this is what you end up with. I just want those little nubbins, because I want to just work it down in. You can see on this side, you can probably see a little bit of the shading. Let me get a spot where you guys can actually see. Down in around here, it's a little bit darker. Up here, I did a little bit more. I'm going for some natural wear spots down by the corners, some down in here. I have a little bit more on this edge, just to kind of balance it off. So you can kind of see, this is like the full red, and wherever you see some of that shadowing, that's the black wax. So I'm not making it go super harsh. I'm just kind of working it in, and here on these little details on this, I also have a cloth to just kind of wipe it back a little bit, because there I'm kind of pushing it in, and it's going to be a little bit heavier in all those crevices than I want. And for a lot of my cloths, this is the leg of an old pair of pajamas, right? So this is an old pair of pajamas that I had when they get ripped up from my husband, my kids, anything like that. Old t-shirts, I cut them up and I use them for rags. You're not going to want to wash this after. Once it's loaded with wax, you're just going to want to throw it out. Don't put this in your washing machine and get all that wax bunging up your machine. So old clothes, old t-shirts, anything like that, I just used. So this, you can see I can go in multiple directions. If it gets a little bit heavier in a spot, I can take my cloth to blend it out. If it got really heavy and I was having trouble being able to make it move, then I'd add a little bit of clear wax to it. And that clear wax would help me be able to do that. So I'm going in some of the creases, kind of accentuating where you'd get a little bit of wear, but also taking it over into the panel a little bit. And I can go in multiple directions and then just kind of soften it out a little bit. And you start to, I'm just joining you here, kind of looking. You start to see a little bit of the aging, and it just adds a little bit more dimension to the piece than just the flat red would be. I will leave the whole piece overnight. So I want it to dry, I want it to cure, I want that wax to firm up, and then tomorrow I will come back and buff.